Now that we have talked about the five types of blood vessels, which are the arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins, I just want to do a brief video on the blood pressure and velocity of blood flow. Okay, so important. I guess you can say it's like an important definition. Blood pressure is just the pressure exerted by the blood against the blood vessel walls, and velocity of blood flow just means how fast the blood is moving inside the blood vessel. That's essentially what it means, or the speed of the blood flow. Now, if you remember, if we were to compare all the five blood vessels, in terms of blood pressure, it is quite easy because arteries will have the highest blood pressure, but as the blood travels, the blood pressure will gradually decrease. So capillaries will have a medium blood pressure and veins will have the lowest blood pressure. Now, blood pressure has specific values, especially in medicine when you are measuring the blood pressure of the person, but we don't care about the actual values of blood pressure. We don't have to memorize the values of blood pressure. All we just have to know for A-level biology is that the arteries usually have the highest blood pressure, followed by capillaries, followed by veins. Now, in most cases, if I were to just draw out a graph to just show a line of best fit to show the average blood pressure of the artery, arterioles, capillary, venules, and veins, the average blood pressure will decrease. Now, when you talk about velocity of blood flow, the common assumption is that the higher the blood pressure, the higher the velocity of the blood flow. And in most cases, you are not going to be wrong to assume that, because if the blood is given a high blood pressure, the blood will move faster. I have mentioned this in previous videos as well. So the assumption that you'll have is, well, the blood will flow extremely quickly or very fast in the artery. The blood will have a medium speed in capillaries, and the blood flow inside the veins will be very slow. This is the assumption that most students will have. But here's where it becomes a little bit weird, okay? So when I draw out in the graph, the velocity of the blood flow will coincide with the blood pressure. But here's where it becomes extremely weird. In reality, the artery has a high velocity of blood flow, but if you remember, the function of the arterioles is to slow down the blood before it enters the capillaries. So in the arterioles, the blood flow significantly slows down, and the blood flow in the capillary will be at its lowest. So velocity of blood flow in the capillary is very slow. And what is the reason for that? The reason is because it wants to allow time for exchange to happen between the blood and body cells. That is the main reason why blood flow in the capillaries have to be very slow. But the weird thing is, when the blood goes back into the vein, somehow it will speed up. Now, how is that possible? Because if you see, blood pressure in the vein is very low, but suddenly the velocity of the blood flow in the vein becomes higher. How is that even possible that that was able to happen? So the answer is actually quite simple. You see, if I were to draw out capillaries, look at the lumen of the capillaries. They are so narrow that at any one time, the red blood cells have to move in a single file because the diameter of the capillary is 7 micrometer, which is around the diameter of the red blood cells as well. So when the red blood cells are moving in the capillary, the small lumen of the capillaries contributes to a high resistance. Now, what do I mean by that is, imagine if you had a group of people walking within a tunnel, okay, and the tunnel only fits one person at a time. No matter how much you try to move, the tunnel is so narrow that you cannot run inside the tunnel because there's not much space for you to move. So you have to gingerly walk or carefully walk within the tunnel, which slows you down. And it's the same thing with the red blood cells as well. They are moving within this tight space of the capillary lumen, and they don't have a lot of space for them to flow extremely freely. So they'll have to slow down and they'll kind of squeeze through the capillary. That is why blood flow in the capillary is quite slow as well, because the small lumen contributes to a high resistance of blood flow. But the moment they enter the veins, if you remember, the veins have a very large lumen. And a large lumen basically means it has less resistance for the blood to move. And in this case, it's easier for the blood to flow. And thus, even though it has a lower pressure, it has a higher velocity because the lumen does not restrict the blood flow and the blood is able to move faster. It's as simple as that. It's just more of a space issue. Okay, so even though capillaries have a higher pressure, the lumen is so small that the blood has difficulty moving within the capillaries. And the vein, however, even though it has a lower pressure, the larger lumen contributes to a lesser resistance, which makes it easier for blood to flow, and thus the blood flows faster. That's basically it.